Okay, so this is the video for the section 1.1 and 1.2 review material for Math 110. And the beginning review material would be coming from Math 21 or Algebra 1. You need to know how to find the distance, the midpoint, and the equation of a line through any 2 points. So I have 2 points here, and to find the distance, we'd use the distance formula. So we would take the square root of, if we call this x1, we can call this x2. We call this y1, we can call this y2. And so we're really going to subtract our x values. 3 minus -2 is 5. And then add on 4 minus 3, which is 1 squared. Now, order of operations tells us that we want to square before we add. So we're going to get 25 plus 1, and we're going to say the square root of 26. That's the distance. You could put it in your calculator, come up with an approximation if you wanted to, but I gotta get out of here. It will be an approximation. It won't be an exact answer. So it's about 5.099. I like the exact answer, but if you have to have an idea about how far it is, you could approximate. To find the midpoint, you're going to average your x values and average your y values. That's what the formula says. So we're going to take our x values and add them, divide by 2, and our y values, add them, divide by 2. So our midpoint is going to be 1/2, 7/2. And then finally, the equation of the line through means you need to be able to find the slope of the line through those 2 points, which uses the formula y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So in this case, 4 minus 3 over 3 minus -2, or the slope is 1/5. Now at this point I like to use point-slope form. You may prefer slope-intercept form. Either way is fine. You can use either point for this. I'd like to choose the one with the positive x and y values. It just helps keep me away from any negative numbers that I might make a mistake with. But if I do y minus 4, then that should equal 1/5 times x minus 3. That's a fine answer for me on a test. That's an equation of a line. Usually, WebAssign would like you to give it in slope-intercept form. So you would distribute your 1/5 through with multiplication, and then you would add 4 to both sides. So if I add 4, I'm adding 20/5 to -3/5, I'll get 17/5. And that's the equation of the line through those 2 points. The Pythagorean theorem is something that I'm assuming you know, but as a refresher, it says that a leg squared plus a leg squared of any right triangle, so this is a right triangle, should equal the hypotenuse squared, meaning 2 squared plus x squared has to equal 6 squared. And that means that 4 plus x squared has to equal 36. And to solve that, if you take 4 away from both sides, then you can take the square root. Now, I want to be very clear that if you were solving this and it wasn't a geometry problem, you would want to say plus or minus the square root of 32. Because anytime you take the square root of both sides, you want to remember there's a plus or minus to your answer. However, when we're talking about lengths, we'll throw out the negative. So we'll only consider the positive square root of 32. The other thing is WebAssign would mark that wrong because they would want you to see the perfect square factor in 32 of 16, and they'd want you to write it as 4 radical 2. So make sure that you're simplifying your radicals as far as you can. You need to be able to find the intercepts of a graph. So the general rule is to find the x-intercept, you set the variable y equal to 0, and then you solve for x. If you're trying to find the y-intercept, you set the variable x equal to 0, and you solve for y. So for example, these 4 examples, if you want to try them on your own, you can pause the video and then check your answers. But for the x-intercept, I'll solve that here, and the y-intercept, I'll solve that here. So I'm setting y equal to 0 and solving for x. To solve for x, I'd have to subtract 4 from both sides. And now we're in a situation where the only possible solution is an imaginary number. And because I can't square a number and have it turn out negative unless I'm using an imaginary number. And remember that imaginary numbers are not on the x and y axis. They're not going to be answers in calculus. We are only looking for real solutions. So you would say there's no x-intercept in this situation because there's no number that I can square and get -4. That's a real number. My y-intercept, I'd set x equal to 0, and my y-intercept is 4. You want to write that as a point where when x is 0, y is 4. Here for the x-intercept, I will solve 0 equals x cubed minus 8. I can solve it by factoring, or I could solve it by taking the cube root of both sides. I'm going to solve it by factoring because I want to remind you that you need to know how to factor the difference of 2 perfect cubes. This has no real solutions, so I'm not going to try to factor that anymore, but I will get my one solution of 2 from the binomial. And so my x-intercept is 2, 0. For my y-intercept, I'm going to set x equal to 0, and I'm going to take 0 cubed minus 8, which is -8, so 0, -8. Here, my x-intercept, I'm setting 0 equal to the square root of 4 minus x squared. If I square both sides, I can say then 0 has to equal 4 minus x squared. And if I factor, I will be very sure that I will get both solutions instead of moving the x squared over and taking the square root and maybe forgetting my plus or minus. So now I'm finding that I have 2 x-intercepts. This factor being set to 0 would mean x is 2, and this would mean x is -2. So my 2 x-intercepts are 2, 0, and -2, 0. My y-intercept, I'm going to plug 0 in for x, and it's the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. Sometimes people get confused about whether the square root of 4 is 2 and -2, but square roots are defined to be the positive value. So my y-intercept is 0, 2. Last one, if I try to find my x-intercept, all the y's in the problem should be set to 0. And that's going to leave me with 0 minus x squared plus 0 equals 0. And the only way for that to be true, the only thing I can square and then make it negative and get 0 is 0 itself. So my x-intercept, which is also a y-intercept, is 0, 0. My y-intercept, all the x's will be set to 0. And this term will be 0 minus 0 plus 4y equals 0. So no new information here. My y-intercept and my x-intercept are both 0, 0. So that is the end of section 1.1 and 1.2. I'll make another video for the next.